Right, members, we're going to begin our second meeting now. You don't have to stand, it's fine. So welcome members, officers, and the extra person in the public gallery tonight, and to everyone else again watching in YouTube. Second full council meeting tonight. So like buses, you wait ages for one and two come along at the same time. There you go. So I won't repeat what I said earlier, and we'll go straight down to business. Mr. Bailey, I know any apologies for absence.
Yes, there are a couple I missed off in the first meeting, so apologies for that. So we got apologies from councillors Basutil, Steed, Alexander, Mataza, and one more.
Steed.
Yeah. Oh no, sorry, that was it. That's it. Sorry.
Okay. And the second question again: are there any councillors present virtually?
Yes, we have councillors Baines, Blacker, Sahota, Kim Nagpal, and Rai.
Thank you. Are there any declarations of interest? Councillor Crawford.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. In accordance with the legal action I'm taking against Ealing Council for their abuses of the Equality Act of 2010, since 2010, I must recuse myself from participation in item 8. And I will therefore be leaving the room at this point, not participating in the debate and not participating in the voting. I apologise to you, Mr. Mayor, and all of my colleagues. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Crawford. Any other declaration of interest? Just to be certain. No. All right, minutes of the meeting held on 13th of June. Are the minutes of the meeting held on 13th of June 2023 agreed? Thank you. Mayor's announcements. I'm going to go through these at breakneck speed. So colleagues, members, sorry, it's been a busy few weeks, and I have to say I'm way behind with social media updates, so I'm not going to list everything. Just a few highlights. First of all, I should say I did spend my birthday last week in hospital as forewarned. It was a successful operation and a delightful afternoon with West London Hospital Trust at Clay Ponds Hospital in Ealing to help celebrate the NHS's 75th birthday. You can celebrate for the NHS, even not for me. Armed Forces Reserves Day and Armed Forces Day. This year, for the first time, we invited the Armed Forces Reserves Day staff into the parlour for afternoon tea together with the leader. This was followed by the Armed Forces Day ceremony and a celebration at both the Ealing Ex-Servicemen's Club in Ealing and the Royal British Legion in Greenford. Windrush Day, in addition to the event at Soane's Kitchen on 22nd June, we also held afternoon tea together with the leader. We go together now, with several guests on Monday, 19th of June. And some of those guests are actually here today, and you'll be hearing with them as part of one of the motions. Thank you, those councillors turned up for the annual civic mass at the Ealing Abbey on the 2nd of July. Carnivals. I had the delight of joining the procession with James Murray MP and attending my first ever Hanwell Carnival in all my years as a councillor. And thank you to those dozen councillors who attended. Thank you very much. It was a lovely carnival. I also had the pleasure of leading the acting carnival this Saturday, which of course is just a short walk away from my home. And thank you, councillors Donnelly and Gallant, for joining me as well. LGBT Pride. It's been a great month for Pride in Ealing. I hosted the first ever Mayor of Ealing Pride reception aimed at organisations who work with the LGBT community and raise funds for the Mayor's Fund for Charities. And together with a few councillors, we joined the LGBT staff group on the Pride Parade in London on the 1st of July. This was Ealing's first year participating in the parade, and it's an enjoyable day for all. And also to mention my first significant donation to the Mayor's charity, which came in June from the formal visit to the She Joel Mundy in Greenford. Now, a number of things to look forward to on this coming Thursday. I'll be attending the Ealing Beer Festival. Councillors are welcome to join me at 4 o'clock. Friday, 21st of July, the first of what I hope will be maybe a number of curry clubs across the borough will be held at Monty's Restaurant in Ealing Broadway. It's a day after certain by-elections, so it all depends on your mood. Any donations or raffle prizes always welcome. Whether for this event or future ones, please let the office know as soon as you can. We're planning a summer event at a cricket club near me in August, possibly, so watch this space for details. Best of luck to the Lionesses and Ealing's very own Chloe Kelly, we just obviously wanted Swindon Borough in the Women's World Cup in Australia and New Zealand. And to satisfy Councillor Munro, good luck to England for the rest of the Ashes cricket series. He told me to enjoy cricket. And finally, some other good news today. I can now officially announce my second charity tonight. It's called EASE, not the one in West Ealing. It's Ealing and Acton Support Enterprise, which supports refugees and asylum seekers. It was a mere technicality, but they've now been given their formal charity status. So look out for further information going forward. So on to the next item, and I've now lost my page. Which is item 5, petitions from members of the public. We've not been notified of any petitions from members of the public. Item 6, petitions members of the council. Are there any petitions members of the council? No, thank you. Questions from members of the public. There are no questions from the members of the public. Now, before we move on, make sure I got this right, sorry. Yes. Before we move to the next item of business, I would like to move that we amend the order of business to take the majority group motion for debate first, so we have external speakers to contribute to our debate tonight. That's me moving it, so is that seconded?
Seconded, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Shaw. Is that agreed? Thank you. So we move on to item 8, which is the majority group motion for debate. Before we debate this motion, I call on Councillor Shaw to move a procedural motion to suspend standing orders in relation to this item.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I move the procedural motion to suspend the standing orders for this item and allow our guests across the chamber from me, Margaret Knoll, Judy Wellington and Blossom Jackson, all to speak on this motion.
Thank you. Is that seconded? Is that agreed? Right. I shall now call on Councillor Anderson to move the majority group motion for debate.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It is a privilege to propose this motion to the Chamber tonight. As you just mentioned, 2.5 weeks ago, residents and communities from across Ealing, West London and beyond gathered at Soane's Kitchen to shine a spotlight on a special generation of Britons, to remember their personal sacrifices, to celebrate their achievements, and most important of all, to give thanks for the contribution that they and their descendants have made and continue to make to all aspects of British life. Now, today, many of that special generation are called the Windrush generation, named after the ship that brought almost 1,000 men and women to the Tilbury docks from the Caribbean in June 1948. But we know that the Windrush generation represents more than just a ship. They represent a new era of migration to Britain from the Caribbean and from the wider Commonwealth. These men and women came to help rebuild a Britain ravaged by war and dogged by chronic labour shortages. And yes, to realise new opportunities for themselves and their families. And in the years and the decades that have passed, they have contributed so much, be it for caring for our sick in the NHS, helping run our public transport, serving in our armed forces, starting new businesses, to contributing to our music, our cuisine and our culture, becoming our friends, our neighbours, and truly fellow citizens. Each and every one have helped shape a new post-war Britain. But let's face it, their path in this country was not always an easy one. Besides the frightfully cold British winters, the welcomes and attitudes from those already living here were too often no less frosty. And it is only because of their resilience, their perseverance, and their sheer dedication to our country that Britain is a country that is more at ease with itself than we could have possibly imagined 75 years ago. And that, Mr. Mayor, is why it was so important that we marked Windrush 75 properly. But it is just as important that we recognize, acknowledge, and commit to act on the injustices that too many British Caribbeans face today. We all know that the Windrush scandal continues to hang like an albatross around our necks. That's why this motion calls for the government to implement all 30 recommendations of the Wendy Williams review in full. No ifs, no buts, and no backsliding. Only then can we say that we have done what is right by our fellow citizens. But Mr. Mayor, this should be a moment for us all in this chamber to reflect, to listen, and to celebrate our own Ealing residents. I am delighted that we are joined by our very own Ealing pioneers, Blossom, Margaret, and Judy, so that we don't just read about them in newspaper cuttings and magazines, but that we see them and that we hear from them. And I, for one, can't wait to hear what they have to tell us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Anderson. I've got Councillor Mason to second.
Yeah, I second the motion, Mr. Mayor, and reserve my right to speak later in the debate.
Thank you. Right, we've got 3 guests who are going to speak, and they've got additional time of up to 5 minutes each. So the order I've got, just to say, is first of all Blossom Jackson, then Margaret Knoll, and then Judy Wellington. Is that not the order?
I've actually been nominated to go first. I'm Judy Wellington.
5 minutes, by the way.
Okay. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. As I said earlier, I'm Judy Wellington, and I thank you for the opportunity to come and speak about my experience of Windrush. I arrived in this country in 1961 as an unaccompanied minor. I came to join my parents. We lived in Acton. My mother left myself and 2 other siblings with my grandparents, and a year later, she came back and took my younger brother with her. When I left my grandparents at age 11, I was very sad. It was like a death sentence. I left the grandparents I loved and who I considered to be my parents to start a life with relative strangers who were actually my biological parents. So I just want you to imagine the transition. So I attended Twyford School and settled into life in London. Growing up in London meant that I had to navigate between 2 identities. At home, I was this Bajan child who was expected to do chores, babysit my younger siblings, and take on a lot of responsibilities that my English friends did not. My parents worked hard, very hard, long hours. They were always exhausted and often only responded with discipline. In retrospect, I realized that the dream of a better life that was my parents' dream was only realized through that level of hard work and sacrifices that I didn't understand at the time, but understood more when I became an adult. Home life was also fun. As a family, we played games because at the time, everything closed on Sundays. So the off licenses closed at 10. So we got together, the music would go on the radiogram, we would dance, we would play games. And on Saturday mornings, we went to Saturday morning pictures. The highlight of our lives were the community events. Caribbean people, we'd pack up a load of food, drink, music, and go to the seaside in big buses, coaches. And we'd go to a hall, sometimes 10 coaches, eat as much, drink as much, and party hard. That to me was the sense of Caribbean life that gave me belonging. A typical Saturday night at home would be when friends came to the house for the evening. Again, there would be fried chicken, drinks, music, rum, and lots of laughter. Stories about back home, and jokes were also punctuated by their experiences of racism and how they dealt with it. There was never any victims. There were never any victims. It was about resilience and overcoming problems, and sometimes by any means necessary. So school life at Twyford was a great experience. I took part in the debating society, I was in the netball team, and also drama. I enjoyed school. We had an amazing head teacher. In spite of the racism from some teachers and older students, I think I did relatively well. After school, I attended Hammersmith College to finish my GCSEs. Growing up, my experience of growing up in London meant that when I became a mother myself, my husband and I took our children to the Caribbean every summer so that they would know who they were, their own identity. And in fact, I moved to the Caribbean for some years before returning to the UK. When I came to live in London, I came back to Ealing and lived on the Drayton Bridge estate and became immediately involved in community activities and youth work. In 1989, my first son died on the Marchioness. That disaster and the experience was life-changing for my family. And I decided to dedicate my life to his memory. So I went to university as an adult student, completed a degree in humanities, and immediately I went to work at the CRE in the youth and community development. That gave me an opportunity to lead the UK delegation to Strasbourg and Brussels for the European Youth Campaign. It gave me the opportunity to meet young people from many countries and to listen. This was a positive impact on my youth work when I led a youth club at Drayton, because the first thing I did was to set up youth exchanges so that young people could get out of the postcode identity and know themselves in the world rather than part of an estate. And in 1998, I set up the Lifeline Learning Centre in Hanwell. We provided ESOL classes, computer studies, and other short courses. I was careful to employ tutors who shared the same vision. This vision was to provide a learning environment where learners felt valued. So we worked closely with adult education and West Thames College for many years, and we encouraged a caring disposition where everyone's identity was celebrated. And sometimes, in addition to teaching, we helped with letters, phone calls, and support wherever it was needed. I was motivated by the stories I heard as a child and was determined to change the narrative for people who did not have a voice or who often felt disaffected. I retired in 2014, but continued to support the community in different initiatives, the Caribbean Social Forum I work with, and other groups. I was privileged to know the pioneers, Willis Wilkie, Jimmy Barsey, Molly Hunt, and the Huntleys. And all the people that worked selflessly inspired me. So I now teach English as a volunteer and work with Hestia on the Phoenix Project. So I've said all about my life to say my experience of Windrush and the hope of a better life started with my parents' dream and continues with my life and through my children. My father had skills in finance, but he drove a train. My son has accomplished his dream. As a proud mother, I saw him receive an MBA 8 years ago. My mother worked long and hard to provide for the family because she wanted her children to have the best educational opportunities. I benefited from her sacrifices, and the platform that she provided was her ceiling. Now, my ceiling is my children's platform so that their life will take forward in the very positive way the Windrush dream. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Judy. I'm not sure who's next now. It's Margaret. Okay, thank you.
Okay, good evening, everyone. There are some of you I know very well. My name is Margaret Noel, and I'm 70 this year, celebrated my 70th birthday. I came to England in 1961. I was then 8 years old, and I came with my sister. We came on a boat because our parents, my dad left first and he arrived here in the 50s, and then my mom came again in mid-50s as well. And we came up, my sister and I, we were 8 and 7, and to see these people who we had forgotten. But I just agreed, well, they must be my parents because they were so happy to see us. We came and we had a little brother, and that was a bit hard because he was a bit spoiled. And I think what Judy said about looking after the younger ones, we had to look after him. We were Catholic in the Caribbean, and when we got here, the Catholic school would not accept us. And we actually got into a school called, I've forgotten it now, in Westminster, St. Stephen's, which is the Church of England school. And so we started off there. And then I moved to a school called North Paddington, in Paddington area, because we were living in Labradgrove then. We then moved to Acton in 1961, and my parents wanted me to move to school in Ealing, and I had to literally beg because I said, I've got all my friends there, and if we move there, I won't know anybody. So we ended up staying in Paddington, and the friends I made there, I've still got them. We have reunions and things all these years on. In fact, my teacher, one of my teachers was 100 years, and I went to that celebration and the whole class was there. Because we couldn't go to Catholic school, I'd made my first communion in the Caribbean, but to make your confirmation, I actually made my confirmation in Westminster because we weren't allowed into the schools. So we went to just secondary school, comprehensive school, and I think the Queen opened it at one stage. Education there was okay, but that school actually had quite a number of Black children. And I remember when I came here, I was far ahead of my brother. But when I got here, I was told I had to write in single letters, and I was made to learn again. And you're not to do that, and got lots of rulers. Then because I think I didn't turn up for a play, I had a bad report. So when I moved from primary to secondary, I was actually put in what we call the dunce class. And I stayed there for a while. And of course, our parents don't know what's happening to us. We're in these schools. So I went from being a bright child in the Caribbean to coming here and being in the dance class going into the secondary. And I think it took about 2 years for them to realize that this child is not dunce. She's quite a smart girl. And they moved me into the O-level class. But there was a lot of messing about because I was in maths, and then I was taken out and put in economics because I'd be good at economics, and I had no idea what economics was about. So my thing was art. I was a very good artist, and I actually got into London School of Fashion. And my mum said, no, you're not doing that. You're being a nurse. So of course I had to be a nurse, and I was a nurse for a while, for quite a few years, and I enjoyed it, and I don't look back and have any regrets. I then went on to become a probation officer. And the reason why I went in that direction is once I had children and they were going to school, I was suddenly seeing a lot of people, young Black people, being arrested. And I was thinking, well, that's not my experience of Black people. So I decided I could make a difference. So I joined the probation service and worked in the probation service for quite a number of years, including Wormwood Scrubs Prison. I worked in there for 6 years. And alongside this, when I was in the prison, I thought, my God, the prison is full of Black men. So I decided I'm going to start this group. And that's where Descendants came about. Descendants is now 30 years old and still going strong. But it was those experience of seeing young Black men over too much in the prison that I decided I'm going to see what I can do, which is what I joined. So Descendants came about, and we established the club so that we can show people that if you look well enough, you can see that Black people are doing as good as any other group, but we were just being held back. That's in my opinion. We were being held back. It wasn't promoted as they can do things. We were promoted on the telly, we were seen on the telly, on the news, and every time you saw somebody being shot, you hid your hands and you thought that it's going to be a Black person. And if it wasn't, you were glad because it just seemed to be us. And 30 years on, I think things have improved, but it's still, we seem to focus on the negative. And I would really, really appreciate if that could change and you could look at us and not see criminals. You look at us and see people who are striving for things. I mean, in my being held back didn't hold me back. And I gave that same feeling to my daughters. So my granddaughter now, the first granddaughter, she got a first-class honours degree. The second granddaughter, she has now qualified as a pilot and she's got a job in Scotland. So we are doing things. And on Saturday, we ran an achievement awards. And I can tell you, the children there, it needs to be public. People need to hear that not all Black children go around doing the wrong things. These were amazing, amazing children. These are your community. This is Ealing. And, you know, you should be very, very proud, and we should be promoting it. I know things go wrong. I know people get shot and all that, but let's focus on the children, because if you focus on the good, the children who are in school, it's going to be cool. It's going to be cool to go out there and say, I've done this, I've done that, I've got how many, and we have got too many bright children, not just in Ealing, but I'm just talking about Ealing because the school that we're looking at is Ealing. So let's look at the positive. Let's try and, one of the things I keep saying is I would like July to be known as the month for achievement, because you get your your GCSE results, you get your A-level results, you get your degrees from the universities in this month. Let's not talk about crime all the time, and let's talk about the children who are doing well. It will help the next generation.
Thank you, Margaret. And last but not least, Blossom Jackson.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, and visitors in the gallery, including my daughter, Dr. Joan Van Den Brink, who attended Ealing Grammar, that later became Ellen Wilkinson, then Cambridge, where she got her doctorate. It is a privilege to address this congregation, this group this evening. And brevity is a spice of wit, and I know I only have 5 minutes. So briefly, I will discuss coming to England, the reason for coming to England, a quick canter through my professional career, and also my voluntary work, statutory and voluntary, which included the Olympics, where I was the Methodist representatives for the Best Athletes Family Homestay Program in 2012 Olympics. Now, my father was a politician in Jamaica who became a politician when Jamaica attained universal suffrage, and he actually lived in this borough, and he's buried in Greenford Cemetery. And as a politician, he was always an enabler. And when he came to England in 1951, having lost the election for the third time, and lost a lot of other things, including 10 acres of bananas blown flat, he was down on his uppers. So he decided to come to England, and he sent for me, his eldest daughter, to do nursing. He said they were crying out for nurses. So you have a choice of continuing to do teaching, which was an option I had when I did Jamaica local examination, or come to England. And I decided to come. When I arrived here, he did not get my letter that I was coming. So at 18, traveling alone, I went to the British Council, who said, "Don't worry, my dear, we'll take you to your father." So she took me all the way from Heathrow on a bus to Beckler Road, where my father had bought his first house. So imagine his surprise when he saw me. Are you Mr. Ball? And she made sure that he was authentic. And it's only now that I'm reflecting on my life and writing my biography, I remember this lady, and I know she would have been long gone. I wish I could thank her for taking the trouble to go the extra mile and doing service. I started my training at the world famous Moorfields Eye Hospital in 1954, where I was one of the first 6 Black nurses to be trained there. And now that the late Queen Elizabeth has died, I was one of the students who formed Guard of Honor when she visited that hospital for the 150th anniversary. From Moorfields, I went to Addenbrooke's Hospital, where I did my training. And from there went on to do midwifery and then health visiting. It was Ealing Borough that sponsored me for the training. And I was a health visitor in this borough for 6 years. And we used to have meeting in this building because the health department was based here under the Medical Office of Health, Dr. Seppelt, and Miss Bexlin was the superintendent. So there's a sense of nostalgia coming back here. And from, I was made health visitor in charge of Ravener Park Clinic, which pioneered GP attachment in this borough, and also one of the first 4 health visitors to teach health education in primary, secondary, and primary and secondary schools. From here, I was employed in Camden, a senior nursing officer, education and training, and then went on to be assistant health education officer. Now, all along, from Moorfields to Camden, my enablers were white people, not Black people, because there were no senior Black people at the moment. So I felt I owe them a host of thanks for enabling me, and they were consummate role models. Then from there, I went to East London University. It's now a university, but it was a polytechnic then, where I was a health visitor tutor teaching physiological development to community staff, and also the course tutor for one of the first school nurses courses in the country. From there, I went to Oxford Brookes, where I was the first Black principal lecturer. And from there, I went to the United Kingdom Central Council for Nurses, Midwife, and Health Visitors, where I was responsible for all community nurses, including health visitors, district nurses, community psychiatric nurses, practice nurses. I hope I haven't left out all the others. And then after leaving the UKCC, I actually set up my own multicultural business. And if you Google multicultural books, I still have my website, although I've closed. My 5 minutes is up.
One last thing to say.
One last thing. I still do voluntary work. I'm on the Board of Governors for Inside School, which had an excellent Ofsted report. Thank you for listening.
Right, thank you to all three speakers as well. We're mindful this is a motion we're debating as well. So, and we got to about 8:10 before we get to the next item. So I've got Councillor Hirsch who's going to respond to the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and welcome, dear guests. And thank you so much for sharing your personal stories. How enlightening. We recently had a Windrush celebration day, and Judy, I can tell you, there was no rum, clearly a miss. We will do next time better. We did acknowledge the cultural, social, and economic contribution this generation brought to this country. And aren't you the best shining examples for that contribution? Thank you very much. While the Windrush arrival was a historic event, it actually now is also a symbol for people who arrive in this country to either improve their life or actually save their lives. I truly was amazed at our last council meeting how many of my colleagues here have actually got a migration background and how diverse we are in this council. And we are representing the population in Ealing because only half of the people in Ealing are actually born in England and Wales. The last census of 2021 showed there are about 11% of people who identify themselves as Black, Caribbean, or African. While I may be merely an immigrant from the continent there over the channel, I have an insight what it might be to actually arrive in a country with only a suitcase and trying to rebuild your life. My husband's father and grandfather had to escape the Nazis in 1939. And they also found themselves to rebuild a life. But in order to get into the country, they too had to bend some rules in achieving this. One of them a student pretending to be a year younger than he was actually. And the other a professional artist who had to present a hastily gathered list of commissions for artworks to the authorities. Because at that time, there was no free movement and people could just not move from one country to the other, something we enjoyed as part of the European Union and have contrived to give away. Immigration is something which has formed and enriched this country, and it wouldn't be the same without it. But Windrush today stands also for something else. It stands for a shameful treatment of immigrants and the denial of even some of their basic rights. Looking now how asylum seekers are treated, yes, staying years in limbo about their status, not being able to work, not being able to actually build their lives, not to mention of sending them to Rwanda. With this, I think, in mind, we have to acknowledge that the Windrush scandal of 2018 is not fully resolved today. And the Home Office has to fulfill every one of the pledges, not leaving something out which might
Councillor,
be
can you mind,
inconvenient.
please?
And so I'm very happy to second this motion. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Mason, you're next.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Firstly, let me thank the pioneers for coming to share their experiences. I think just as we spoke in our last motion, one of refugees in the borough of Sanctuary, there's something remarkably familiar with your stories. Remarkably familiar to so many people in this room, but yet set aside for the experience that has happened since. Our borough is one of so many cultures, both from around the world, from within the Commonwealth, and even from other parts of the UK, who decided to call Ealing their home, just as the Windrush generation did all the way back in the 1940s forward. The distinction very clearly, though, for the Windrush generation was that they were not arriving as foreign migrants or foreign labour. Yes, they were coming to the country to rebuild in the wake of the Second World War. But they were arriving as citizen migrants in 1948 because of the British Citizenship Act, and before that as subjects. Every legal right was afforded to that generation to be in this country, to work, to settle, to build lives. But it is the actions of successive governments since that have deprived the liberties of so many people for whom lived here, who worked here, who loved here, who set up families here, that act, I'm afraid, as the stain for that Windrush generation. And I'm afraid that's the story of our approach as a nation to migration, starting in the 1914 Aliens Act, that began the process of demonizing those who came to this country fleeing from persecution, from war, and from economic destitution. The Windrush ship itself was formerly the Monte Rosa, a German-built ship that deported Jews from Norway to Hamburg for those Jews to be put on trains to Auschwitz. It was that ship that would provide the salvation to a generation of people moving, yes, from the Caribbean to the UK to establish new lives. What they would arrive to and what they experience still to this day are forms of institutional racisms and discriminations that still persist. The gaps in education, the huge disparities in income, the reality of where you will live, even in a place like Ealing. Now, I'm very sad to say that we have an amendment from one of the opposition parties that contains within it, I'm afraid, some quite significant mistruths. But I'd also say an approach to the Windrush scandal that they would need to seriously reconsider. A previous amendment to the motion contained some quite discriminatory and racist language made by 11 Labour MPs in 1948 in response to the Windrush arriving in the UK. 11 racist Labour MPs who were given short, sharp thrift by the Attlee government. They were told where to get off. But the distinction between the situation then and the situation now is that in the 75 years of progress that we've made in this country, each and every one of us should be willing to stand up against the worst excesses, even of our own friends, Is there anybody in this chamber who knows something about calling out racism amongst the Labour Party? Me. The distinction between 11 racist MPs 11 years ago and the situation that we face today, I'm afraid, is one in which, whilst we are absolutely clear of condemnation of racist language and stereotypes, we've experienced a hostile environment for too many years, of the deliberate attempt by the Home Office to institutionally deprive a generation of people of their God-given right, their legislative given right to be in this country. Families torn apart, literally deported from this country because of the actions of the Home Office in destroying papers and preventing reconciliation. We equally have the disgraceful situation of the deprivation of joy, literally whitewashing murals in detention centres for refugees because it is the formal policy of the government. We have to reflect, each and every one of us, on what we are willing to do to make a clear message to the people who live in this borough and also beyond. We, each and every one of us, take responsibility for those actions. We owe the Windrush generation a debt of gratitude for their dream of a better life and for the sacrifices they made to rebuild our country in the most adverse situation. And that they should have such resilience and such warmth and joy despite the challenges that they faced for being in this country. We owe that debt of gratitude. So I'd ask very carefully and I'd ask very cautiously, I'd ask the Leader of the Opposition, I'd ask you seriously, please refrain from moving your amendment and let us proceed with the Labour Group's motion, clear of, I think, the division to which you are seeking to sow.
Okay, look, members, actually, can I just address that question first? Are you intending to withdraw your amendment? Yeah, it's yes or no, otherwise we'll carry on.
We're not going to withdraw
Okay.
the amendment.
That's fine. All right. Given, I know this is a very important subject and people are very passionate and we see speakers have already gone over time. I'll give it to 8:20 because we still need to allow time for the other items as well. If that's members okay with that. So you'll all have to be mindful that, you know, we'll have to get to the end and cut one or two off. So Councillor Newstead, will you with the next one?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Blossom, Margaret and Judy. I had planned to honour the Windrush generation in my speech, to celebrate everything they and their descendants have done to make Britain an incomparably better place, to thank them and to look forward to a better future, one where the indignities and betrayals of the Windrush scandal were in the past. The Williams report notes that the Windrush scandal pursued people into crisis because the government didn't accept their legal right to live in the UK. And as a result, they felt the force of immigration enforcement measures. Is it not enough that we have a government comfortable with using migration to deliberately demonise those who need our help most? Is it not enough that we have a government prepared to dance with far-right ideology and then make it a central plank of their policy? But we have one who is prepared to bring these cruel weapons of despair and marginalisation to bear on those who have lived here for generations, who rebuilt Britain when Britain needed it most, who have lived here for generations, raised kids, created communities, called this home, our friends, our families, our colleagues. A scandal in which many were detained, lost their jobs, their homes, had their passports confiscated, denied benefits and medical care. So I am proud that we have brought this chamber a motion to demand the wrongs of the Windrush scandal are righted. But I am shocked and frankly revolted that the Conservatives have sunk to new lows. Not only have they not accepted and applauded this motion, they have tried to dodge their failings by criticising the Labour Party. The most cursory understanding of modern politics paints a scandalous picture for the Conservatives, a disgraceful history of racism. Do I really need to mention Tory councils buying up houses to prevent people of colour moving in, or Powell's River of Blood, or Thatcher's refusal to condemn apartheid? And why is this lesson in history important? Surely I wouldn't just be scoring political points, but it is important because it is not history. It has never been more relevant than now. This government created the Windrush scandal, and even more scandalously refuses to right the wrongs it created. A government that is prepared to lurch ever further to the right in the sickening and ever more desperate death throes of a morally bunk government. A government prepared to insist on painting over Mickey Mouse lest unaccompanied children find him too welcoming. And as Stephen Kinnock said yesterday, all they have left is tough talk and cruel and callous policies. And who cannot fail to be moved by Michael Rosen's poem, paint over Mickey Mouse, burn where the wild things are, pulverize the Lego, set fire to the Christmas tree star, seize all the teddies, bury every skipping rope, paint the walls dark brown, abolish all hope. So please let me end on a more positive note. A Labour government will manage migration in a humane and efficient way. A Labour government will not use the most vulnerable as pawns in a vicious game as this government does. And a Labour government will never paint over children's pictures to score political points with their far-right base. And a Labour government will ensure that the wrongs of the Windrush scandal are righted and dignity and justice is restored. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, at this point, I think given the state of the debate, I would like to move a closure motion under 1411E that the question now be put rather than hear the opposition amendment.
Seconded, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. Okay, all right. The amendment has been moved, therefore we'll move to the closure motion. So can I have all those in favour? Okay, and all those against? So that's carried. Oh, sorry. Abstentions. There you go, that's it. We'll move on next line. Next item. Sorry. Yeah, okay, we move on the substantive motion. All right, so all those in favour of the substantive motion, put your hands up. Okay, all those against?
Voting for this.
Hang on. Let's just do it again. So all those in favour of the substantive motion.
Thank you, we're in favour.
Right, thank you. Okay, all those against? Anyone, any abstentions? Okay, that's carried. Thank you, sorry. Threw me slightly. So that debate, a motion is carried. We're going to move on to the next item, which is going to be. Right, thank you, members, for that round of applause. I was only reading my briefing notes, but hey ho. Right, questions. We got half an hour for questions, members of the council. So it's now 8:09 actually. 30 minutes. So the first question I've got is council members. Can you sit down, please? Councillor Rice to Councillor Donnelly.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Does the portfolio holder agree with me that in these challenging economic times, it is more important than ever that this administration continues to handle the council's budget responsibly?
Thank you, Councillor Rice. I couldn't agree more. This administration, this council under Labour has a track record of sound financial management. One might think that should be an expected thing. I think we've seen that it doesn't happen everywhere. But that financial resilience that we've built in has allowed us to manage the shocks and risks of recent times, like COVID, the disastrous consequences of the Conservatives crashing the economy with the Truss budget. We have managed those crises without having to take drastic action which would detrimentally impact the services our most vulnerable residents need. But that resilience was partly created by our ability to contribute to reserves over a period. But after a decade of austerity, we, like most councils, have very little left to save. If you read around local government press, you will see the very wide understanding that we are coming very close as a sector to the end of the road financially. And in an effort to balance budgets, we've seen some councils take extraordinary risks, which have left them now not on the brink of bankruptcy, but well beyond that line, and leaving debts that the rest of us ultimately will have to pick up. You need look no further than Woking, a council with a debt coming up of £1.2 billion, or a council tax income annually of £11 million. Yeah, they devoted it all to paying off their debt. It'd take 100 years. I mean, think of those figures. They're absolutely terrifying. Despite earlier predictions of falling inflation, it remains stubbornly high. This increases council costs, reduces income, increases demand as the cost of living affects our residents. And funding, of course, has not kept pace with inflation and demand. We know that in adults and children's social care, and we know it now increasingly in terms of the homelessness crisis that's beginning to consume the country. It leaves the council to pick up the costs through other means, including making savings. Future funding remains uncertain. We await eternally local government funding reform and continue to receive single-year funding settlements. I was at the Local Government Association conference last week. We heard Michael Gove announce the new Office of Local Government, but say almost nothing about what it would do or about how it would resolve our problems.
Thank you, Councillor Donnelly.
Thank you.
Thank you. Right, so I don't have a list of supplementary questioners. So is anybody from Labour Group? I can see Councillor Gordon in the corner. You've got a supplementary question?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Does the portfolio holder agree that the government is content letting our residents struggle and needs to step up to help them in the harsh economic climate that they have created?
Thank you, Councillor Gordon. I couldn't put it better myself. I didn't. The Tories ultimately have taken our economy to the casino, bet it all on red, and then when it went down, spent what they'd kept aside on wine for the lockdown parties. We see record inflation, energy prices out of control, the cost of food rocketing up, cost of food especially. The things that our residents need most are the things that have been rising fastest. And all we get from the government are slogans. What start as promises become pledges, then become a kind of, well, it'd be nice to haves. Naive statements about halving inflation, already still over 9%, not a grown-up conversation about the fact that even if they get it at some point to half what it is now, it'll still be at 4.5%, which is still well above what we have been used to historically. and it still will eat into household incomes. If you go onto BBC website now, you'll find that the cost of living crisis is the #1 tab. Whole pages devoted to what's going on. We're living in an economic nightmare caused by decades, 13 years at least, of Tory mismanagement, and accentuated by the fact that the people in charge of our country have become less and less competent and more reckless. So we need now a government to step in and support our residents. And that government, Mr. Mayor, will be a Labour government.
Thank you, Councillor Donnelly. So the second question I've got is Councillor Boards, Councillor Newsted.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The Log Cabin Charity has been operating under a licence ever since 2011, as the previous lease had expired, and has been seeking a new lease ever since. When will the council finally agree their new lease?
Council is looking to agree the new lease with the Log Cabin Charity in the next few months. There have been several reasons why this has taken some time, including a need to align terms with other equivalent providers and the need to agree a concurrent service level agreement for provision of the statutory service that the Log Cabin Charity operates on behalf of the council.
Right, does anyone from Liberal Democrat have a supplementary?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for that answer. Is the portfolio holder aware that the Log Cabin has been promised over £100,000 by a corporate donor to fund a new playground, but this is dependent on the lease being in place? And will she therefore redouble her efforts to resolve this matter as quickly as possible?
As I referred in my previous answer, we are close to reaching an agreement on the lease. So I would suggest that the answer to that is yes, and already answered. Thank you.
Okay, getting shorter and sharper, right? Next question, Councillor Conti to Councillor Kamaljeet Kaur Nagpal.
Thank you. Will there be any capital costs being met from Ealing schools budgets as a result of the London Mayor's one-year universal free schools meals policy?
It's important to be clear on this matter that there's 55 schools who are members of the Ealing Schools Catering Consortium, as well as 4 schools whose catering needs are met via PFI contracts. In relation to the Ealing Schools Catering Consortium, capital investment is being kept to a minimum until longer term plans are known, but some expenditure on replacing old, inefficient equipment and purchasing additional equipment has been brought forward and is anticipated to cost approximately £275,000 across the 55 schools that are members of the consortium. So an average of £5,000 per school. This expenditure was already planned, but the timelines have been brought forward in order to meet this emerging need. The costs will likely be recovered by the council from the consortium schools, and so will not be taken from the school's budget. Capital costs for equipment are not yet known for the PFI contracts, which provide catering services to 4 primary schools. PFI contracts are met from a number of sources, such as central government grant, the budgets of the schools themselves, and the PFI reserve. The council is not involved in catering provision for schools that are not members of the consortium or those that are provided for through PFI. Indicatively, based on 90% take-up of the school roll for years 3 to 6 across Ealing primary schools, the total grant from the GLA for school meals for 23-24 in Ealing is anticipated to be in the region of £4.5 million. We currently understand that it's not intended for there to be any clawback of funds if take-up is below 90%. And that means that if take-up is below 90%, the grant allocation may be greater than the spend on meals and therefore could be used to offset the capital spend.
Thank you, Councillor Nagpal. Sorry, does anybody from the Conservative Group have a supplementary question?
Yeah, I had a supplementary question. It was just to follow up. I think one of the points you made was that you're still waiting for some further details from the GLA, I think, and you had a part of your answer. It was just that obviously there's only 1 week left of term. I just wanted to ensure that Do you think, given that not full details are known yet, do you think that this policy will be able to be implemented by the start of the autumn term in September?
Absolutely. We've done, I think, a fantastic job in working with our schools to make sure they're ready. Schools are ready. They've told us that they are, and everything's in place. Providers have recruited staff where necessary. Everything's ready. We're just waiting to know what the take-up's going to be, but it's looking positive.
Thank you, Councillor Nagpal. Just to point out, I think it was allocated to Councillor Steve Donnelly on the agenda papers initially, but it's fine. Next question is Councillor Blacklini to Councillor Brett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Can the portfolio holder please provide an update on how the council is supporting those with the toughest barriers to employment into the workplace?
Thank you for your question, Councillor Blacklini. I'm proud of the work that has been done so far in Ealing to help support residents that experience the toughest barriers to employment into the workplace. Our officers have been working tirelessly alongside our local partners to deliver programmes that increase employability through training, education, information and guidance. We've provided a wide range of programmes over the last year for all people from lots of different backgrounds who might be struggling to find employment and get back into the workplace. These are things like the Borough Employment Support Programme, the Work and Health Programme, helping to support those with disabilities with access to work, the Horizons Pathways Programme, providing support to 16 to 24-year-olds who are leaving the care system. Those are just three of many, many programmes that we've got in place. All this alongside every job and apprenticeship fair that the council have put on over the last year. The employment support offer for our residents is enormous. And the reward for all of this hard work, well, we didn't just match our target of helping 500 Ealing residents into work, and we didn't just beat our target. We've actually blown our target out of the water with over 1,700 Ealing residents with the toughest barriers to supported into employment in this year alone. When we set out to deliver 10,000 good jobs, we meant it. We want those jobs to be available to everyone, regardless of their background or the barriers that they might be facing. I look forward to another year of delivering jobs, employment support for all of our residents. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Mahmood, was you asking a supplementary?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Does the portfolio holder share my concern about the ever persistent gap in pay for those with disability in the UK and the lack of effective government action to tackle this issue?
Thank you for your question, Councillor Mahmood. And of course, I share the concern with the ever-growing gap with those with disabilities and those without disabilities in the UK. According to the TUC, the current average gap in pay between disabled and non-disabled workers is over 17%. For women with disabilities, it's reported as high as 35%. Those numbers should spark outrage and action from the government, but instead they continue to sit on their hands. The vast gap in pay represents a significant hole in earnings for those with disabilities. Through no fault of their own, people with disabilities are losing out on thousands of pounds. The gap is so large, it's equivalent to people with disabilities doing 50 days of unpaid work a year. The effect this is having on them and their families during the current cost of living crisis is enormous, with Tories' lack of action only strengthening the already tight squeeze on the most financially vulnerable in our society. People with disabilities find themselves amongst the litany of other groups who the Tories have abandoned and left to fend for themselves. And the Tory view on this injustice, sitting MPs who believe that those with disabilities should be paid less because, and I quote, they don't understand money. Or how the Tory peers who sought to end the adjustments made to those with disabilities and those who were shielding from COVID participate in debates. There are so many words to describe the Tories, how the Tories have treated people with disabilities over the past 13 years. But 3 will do: disgraceful, disgusting, despicable. We can always do more to support people with both visible and invisible disabilities in our borough. The council is constantly working to ensure that people with disabilities are paid a decent living income and are respected at work and can have full careers. That's why our work to support people with the toughest barriers is so important. That's why our work to ensure employers pay the living wage is so vital. In the face of Tory apathy and ignorance, Labour in Ealing is continuing to provide well-paid jobs and economic prosperity to all our residents.
Thank you. Next question I've got is Councillor Gallant to Councillor Monroe.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Will the portfolio holder update on the rollout of a new system to coordinate Section 106 payments as announced in the 2022 council plan?
Thank you, Councillor Gallant, for your question. I'm very happy to provide you with an update on the new system we have implemented to monitor Section 106 payments. We're taking this commitment incredibly seriously, as whilst at first glance it may seem a little bit dull, it's an important way that we get most out of new development on behalf of our residents. The council has invested in a software system called XCOM, which is currently live and functioning internally. Our dedicated team of officers are working hard to ensure that the system is populated fully with historical and new applications. A cross-departmental approach between officers in our planning, finance, and legal teams has been key in the successful implementation of this XCOM system, ensuring that every single penny of Section 106 contributions is accounted for and can be successfully and appropriately allocated for supplementary works, improving the physical and social infrastructure surrounding new developments, making our neighborhoods safer and improving the climate resilience of our 7 towns. As always, in our present interest of being an open, transparent, and inclusive council, the XCOM data will be ultimately available for public consumption, just as the old low-tech spreadsheets were before. Whilst Tory authorities up and down the country abandon their local plans, slow development, and leave their residents without the essentials of genuinely affordable housing, strong and modern infrastructure, and spaces for businesses to operate and grow from, in Ealing, Labour are doing the opposite. We are taxing developers smartly, focusing our expenditure on what matters most to our communities, and ensuring that growth and prosperity is experienced in every corner of the borough.
Does anybody from Public Supplement?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you very much for that update. There is one concern about, of course, that there's a large amount of unspent 106 and SIL money there. Is the portfolio holder confident that the XCOM system will take care of that issue?
Councillor Gallant, as indicated, SEAL is not yet in operation. SEAL, as in our manifesto commitment, is around gathering £12 million a year up and maybe more, and then allocating 20% of that to the 7 towns. The 106 is allocated as and when it goes through, but the problem is that system needs to be populated and done properly, and then we will have an idea of where that money is, but it's constantly coming in and constantly going out as departments spend the money. So at the moment, we don't have an idea, and I don't recognize what you're saying. It's just we're just changing the system so we have a better control of where that money goes.
Thank you. Next question is Councillor Kingston to Councillor Mason.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Can the portfolio holder update the council on the extension and improvement of the CCTV network in Ealing?
Do you want to repeat your question, Mr. Councillor Kingston?
Can the portfolio holder update the council on the extension and improvement of the CCTV network in Ealing?
Okay, we'll take that one first. Okay.
Bye.
Fine, yeah.
May, please.
Thank you, Councillor, for your question. And of course, I would be happy to do so. The council have continued to deliver additional and upgraded cameras to sites across the borough where residents are telling us they feel less safe. And those areas where crime and antisocial behaviour data tells us there is an identified pressing need of CCTVs. The Ealing network now has 44 new cameras, following our Safer Ealing for Women listening exercise last year and a successful bid via MOPAC to the Home Office for funding focused on improving women's safety in the public realm. One of the key physical improvements we have delivered in the borough is an additional 18 CCTV cameras across locations where women and girls told us they felt less safe. As a result of the upgrade programme, all of Ealing's 7 towns now have full high definition HD coverage in their town centre locations, and full HD coverage has also now been extended along the entire Uxbridge Road corridor. This upgrade and extension programme has been key to improving surveillance of those spaces and reducing blind spots to almost nil. Mr. Mayor, I was really pleased to spend Friday afternoon last week with the staff who were diligently and efficiently monitoring our CCTV cameras and proactively alert the police to emerging issues. Ealing is also continually looking at opportunities to innovate as a leader in emerging technology, as an addition to our own cameras. Ealing has been leading London in collaboration with the Police Nomad project, in which police CCTV cameras can be deployed quickly to locations of emerging concern to allow for evidence of the concern to be obtained and to provide some visible reassurance to our residents. Mr. Mayor, the majority of the blind spots in our town centres have been covered. 3 4K cameras have been installed in Ealing Broadway, and we will continue to improve on this, as it is upsetting that less than 60% of our female residents feel safe in their area after dark.
Thank you, Councillor. Is there a supplementary question for the Labour Group?
Yes.
Okay, Councillor.
Thank you. Does the portfolio holder agree with me that responding to operational needs and improving the efficacy of our CCTV network should be a continuing priority?
Thank you, Councillor. Yes, I fully agree. And we are trying to ensure that the continual improvements are part of the business as usual culture of the council. For example, as well as making financial sense, the move to refurbish Percival House instead of building a new office opens up new avenues for us to house services and community organisations in the heart of the borough. And we've recently invested 1.9 billion of funds in rehousing council services within Percival House and other sites, making better use of our council assets. Mr. Mayor, part of this money was spent on improving the CCTV centre that sits in Percival House, helping to make our streets safer. Unfortunately, our Liberal Democrat colleagues, we cannot deliver these important improvements without efficient investments, and it's a real shame that they have so openly and consistently opposed this. The team is also working on ways to streamline information sharing between CCTV networks, for example, with our housing associations, and to ensure that where necessary and appropriate, law enforcement agencies have access to the information they need to prevent combat crime. Mr. Mayor, I believe that our services must evolve with the times, whether it is the work that the Councillor Mason and Councillor Newstub will be leading on the new town forums, or the work I was proud to do in my previous portfolio as the Cultural Manifesto, or the work that has come out of the Race Equalities Commission and the subsequent Citizens Tribunal. This administration has a positive programme that will create a more open, transparent and inclusive borough. The only party with the vision for the future of this borough is Labour, and we're proud to continue driving improvement in all of our 7 towns.
Thank you. I'm also glad to know someone who goes up and down the Uxbridge Road that I'm being carefully watched. All right, the final question, I think, I'm not sure who's actually asking it now. Councillor Sidhu, sorry, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Can the leader provide an update on the efforts by the council to work constructively with the government to improve the lives of the residents in Ealing?
Thank you, Councillor Sidhu. As I'm sure you're all aware, my wonderful colleague, Councillor Donnelly, is very well known for saying that, of course, we are but the temporary custodians of our borough. And we therefore take our responsibility incredibly seriously. That also means that we do work, despite perhaps some of the heat in this chamber, we work very constructively with lots of external stakeholders, whether it's the mayor, the police force, our charities, and even the private sector, you know, and actually Conservative councils across the border. Just today, we're at the West London Alliance and even London councils having deep and meaningful conversations about the future of West London's economy. And we were doing that in sort of close collaboration. And what we've been able to do as a Labour administration within all of that arena is work really hard to get wins for our residents, whether it has been on for things like, for example, extending special educational needs and children with disabilities, holiday provision, whether it's getting a senior police officer responsible for this borough, or indeed winning concessions from the mayor on the ULEZ scrappage scheme to make sure that it extends to even more of our residents. I have to say, when it comes to the government, however, the record is somewhat patchy. We've written to the government 4 times just since the election alone. We've written to them on a range of things, whether it's been HS2 and the construction disturbance that is happening there, and of course their regulation of HS2, or indeed asking the government to give us powers to enforce 20-mile-an-hour speed restrictions in this borough, which we are currently not able to do. In fact, the government even cancelled the trial that was happening in Wandsworth. Sadly, on each occasion, the government have pretty much come back and said no. And unfortunately, it has a habitual habit of treating local government, and particularly Labour and local government, not indeed as a true partner, but unfortunately as an afterthought.
Thank you, Councillor Mason. Was there a supplementary from anybody?
Yes, that's right.
Sorry, Councillor Tyne.
And given the government has repeatedly failed to engage on issues ranging from speeding to the illegal migration and border bill, does the leader feel that central government treats local government and by extension the electorate with the respect that it deserves?
Thank you, Councillor Tyne. I believe that the Conservative government treats the public with utter contempt. And that has been evidenced by not only their willful mishandling of the COVID pandemic, the wasting of billions of pounds on PPE to friends and relatives now coming to light, their disdain for migrants, their disdain for refugees, and indeed their disdain for all of us. Not least, of course, we have a government that have presided over an economic crash, who have deliberately and willfully overseen an economy that has created a cost of living crisis for our residents, that has inflated both inflation and interest rates well above where they would otherwise be, given their reckless behaviour towards the economy. And quite frankly, they're spending all of their time not legislating on the big things that are going to impact our country. They're spending no time whatsoever on their legislative agenda. In fact, they keep pulling bill after bill after bill. Why? Because they are constantly consumed by the psychodrama that is their leadership. They are a divided and weak party who are unable to provide this country with the leadership that it needs. Only a Labour government are prepared to take on the big fights, to work on the missions that we know that we need to complete if we're going to get an economy that we need for the residents of this borough and for elsewhere. Thankfully, in a week's time, the government are going to get a message, because in a week's time, thanks to the hard work and efforts of many people in this room, we will be electing Danny Beales to be the Member of Parliament for Uxbridge and South Ruislip, and I extend our best wishes to him for the week ahead. See you on the campaign trail.
Thank you, Councillor Mason. Some energy has been sucked out of this room in the last few minutes. So maybe we'll have to get some back with the next motion, perhaps. So we're going to move on to the item 9, which is the opposition group motion for debate. So that is going to be moved by Councillor Conti to move the opposition group.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The council often claims that it listens, but does the Mayor of London listen? Does it listen to residents when it comes to ULEZ? Especially given that in his last manifesto for the mayoralty, there was no mention of expanding ULEZ to the M25. It was just the North and South Circular. Now, many will say he had a consultation. He did, but 70% of residents who responded in Outer London did not want to see the ULEZ zone expanded to the M25. Not only did he not listen, did he ever intend to listen? So a freedom of information request made by the GLA showed that the TfL had already ordered the cameras 2 months before the consultation even happened. He had no intention of ever listening to the residents of London on their views on ULEZ. Now, the Mayor claims that the main reason for the expansion is to improve air quality. But Sadiq Khan's own integrated impact assessment says this: on tackling climate change, it would make a negligible impact on carbon emissions, and on the exposure to air quality, it would only have a minor impact on NO2 and a negligible impact on PM 2.5. So the central plank of his policy on improving air quality falls away. So we can see exactly what this is. It's a tax grab. But it's a tax grab on who? TfL's own report in May 2022 said that this policy will disproportionately impact the low-income households in London. So it's a policy with no democratic mandate, where the central plank of the policy to improve air quality doesn't meet his own impact assessment. And it's all balanced on the back of the lowest income households in London. Now, we all want to see improved air quality, but there's other ways to spend the hundreds of millions of pounds that he's put into the ULEZ expansion. For example, a wider scrappage scheme, improving and enhancing and providing more cycle lanes, for example. But instead of looking into these alternative ideas, when he came to Ealing, people who were opposed to the scheme, he calls them right-wing extremists. Now, it's not only ULEZ that the Mayor is failing Londoners on. He's also the Police and Crime Commissioner for London. Do you feel safer in London now than you did a few years ago? We have a police force that's in special measures under his watch. The Metropolitan Police is the only police force in England and Wales that hasn't met its recruitment targets. All other police forces have, and 7 of those are actually recruiting 20% more than their target. Police station closures. Now, Councillor Mason mentioned the Uxbridge by-election. Now, miraculously, the Uxbridge police station has been saved. But what about Southall police station? What about the police station in Ealing Broadway? What will it take for the Mayor to listen to residents of Ealing about our local police stations? So, Mr. Mayor, I urge all members in this chamber to support this motion, to get the Mayor to scrap the expansion of ULEZ, to rebuild trust in the Metropolitan Police, and to stand by his own manifesto commitments.
Thank you, Councillor Conti. I've got Councillor Gallant next on the list.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I second the motion, but reserve my right to speak later in the debate.
Thank you. All right, Councillor Costigan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Last year, 160 residents of Ealing died from air pollution. Now, it doesn't sound like Councillor Conti agrees with this, but every single one of those 160 lives mattered. We need to take action on air pollution. And the action we need is a national scrappage programme to rid our streets of high polluting vehicles that pump out nitrous oxide and tiny particles we can't see, but that infect our organs with every breath we take. But the government doesn't seem to care about air pollution in London, about our 160 residents that die every year. They've refused to give London any funding at all to help clean up our air. They've given £230 million to scrappage schemes in Manchester, in Birmingham, in Bristol and in Bradford, but not a penny for London, our biggest city. It's almost like they've got it in for London and for our residents. Despite the government's decision to strangle London of funding, Sadiq Khan is taking a bold step in expanding the ULEZ. And he's combined this with improving public transport. He's launched the new Superloop bus route, which will make orbital journeys in outer London easier. He's ensured 100% of London buses are no or low emissions from the tailpipe. And he's announced new step-free access for Northolt Tube Station and North Acton Tube Station. In Ealing, we're doing our bit too. We've ramped up fines for idling to the maximum £80, more than doubled the number of electric vehicle charges in a year, and built a new cycle lane in Greenford with more planned for Southall and Northolt. But what nonsense is this Tory motion? It literally says the mayor should spend £250 million he doesn't have. You can't spend money you don't have. Is Liz the Lettuce Truss running Ealing Tories now? And Solar Together has achieved discounts on solar panels for over 30%, while the government do zero to help decarbonise private homes. Now, the Conservative motion does beg the question, if they don't like Sadiq Khan, who do they want instead? But it seems they don't actually have a better candidate. The last person they put forward as London Mayor was found to have attended illegal parties, while Ealing residents were forced to stay indoors, unable to meet with loved ones. What a disgrace. And their preferred candidate for Mayor this time turns out to have a bit of a problem with groping people, allegedly. So he's had to pull out. And of course, the last London Mayor, Boris Johnson, lied to Parliament and had to resign in disgrace. But Mr. Mayor, isn't it interesting that Conservatives' motion tonight focuses on an election that takes place in a year's time, when there's 3 elections happening in just 9 days' time, in Uxbridge, in Somerset and in Selby? Now, why would they want to distract us from these important contests? I think I know why. It's because they know the game is up. They know the electorate have had enough of them, and they know they're going to hemorrhage votes in these 3 by-elections. Colleagues, reject this motion tonight and tell the Tories to come back when they've come up with an actual plan to stop Ealing residents dying from air pollution, and when they've got a candidate for mayor who isn't a liar, a groper, or an illegal partier. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Looks like the energy's back in the room. Right, Councillor Nand, you're next.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This motion, a completely inaccurate view of London today. Mr. Mayor, while it is true that crime rates have increased, it is important to consider the broader context. Crime rates are the result of many different factors, from opportunities to get a good paying job to the standard of education that you are able to get, and to the trauma that an individual may have experienced in their life. Mr. Mayor, all challenges that we are seeking to tackle here in Ealing. It is not surprising that we see the opposition ignoring their own culpability. It is the austerity policies of the Conservative government that have decimated police resources. The Conservative government have failed to act consistently over the last 13 years to ensure that policing services are properly funded, and have failed to implement sufficient reform. Mr. Mayor, it is essential to recognise the efforts that have been made to address these challenges and remember that rebuilding public confidence in policing is a gradual process. Much work remains to build relationships with ethnic minority communities that have traditionally found themselves discriminated against by the very people who are supposed to have protected them. Mr. Mayor, great work will need to go into the toxic culture in the Metropolitan Police that Boris Johnson ignored and failed to challenge during his time in Mayor of London. The current Mayor of London has undertaken significant measures to reform the Met Police. After the IOPC reported bullying, discrimination, misogyny and sexual harassment throughout the ranks of the Met, the Mayor of London launched a plan to tackle the lack of trust in policing, which included holding the London Police Commissioner, Dame Chryssa Dick, accountable, leading to her resignation. Mr. Mayor, on this side of the chamber, we condemn the motion, and we will be working with the Metropolitan Police on the turnaround plan, which is going to be in the future for all of us to discuss.
Thank you, Councillor Nan. There was an amendment submitted to this motion by the Liberal Democrat group, so I'll call on Councillor Malcolm to move the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I formally move the amendment One thing many residents in Ealing have said is that Sadiq Khan has been there a long time and not approved very much to improve the lives of people in Ealing. In fact, there are many areas he has failed. I'm going to focus on just 3 of them. Firstly, he said he encouraged people to buy homes, which they now cannot sell. Following Grenfell, there was a great deal of concern about the quality of housing around the whole of London. But the mayor has now started to fund over the past few years pocket living, which despite that public money going into those companies' pockets, they are providing housing that is unsafe or possibly unsafe. And there are many examples of where that's happened. The mayor of London on our behalf should not be doing that. We should be providing safe housing, and the government needs to go along and make sure that the cladding crisis can be ended without any more deaths or injuries and fears. Secondly, he introduced ULEZ too soon and in a way that does not help residents and businesses in Ealing adapt. For many people who want to give up the most polluting cars, they're the ones who find it financially the most difficult. And the idea of the scrappage scheme is one that can work, but it needs to go a lot further. When it was first launched, it didn't work. It was too small. When the Liberal Democrats and Caroline Pidgeon produced an alternative plan that was financially stacked up, the actual London Assembly agreed to it, but then it was turned down by the mayor. Since then, the updated scrappage scheme is still not good enough. And we have 11 councils expressing great concern legally about ULEZ. Lastly, the alternatives. Well, electric cars and public transport, you need to improve those as you persuade people to give up their cars. If people give up their cars, they need to be able to get to and from work with an enhanced public transport system or alternatives like electric cars that are less polluting. On electric car charging points, in Ealing for many, many years, we were behind the curve. And it's only recently where we've started to make improvements on there. But the actual other sort of aspects of public transport are very clear from the Mayor of London. Since the Mayor of London gained the position of Mayor of London 9 years ago, the TfL fleet has fell by 11%. The number of buses in terms of where they travel is 12 million fewer miles across the capital. There have been bus cuts after bus cuts, and luckily recent bus cuts were cancelled. If you're here to improve and give people a chance, you need to actually improve public transport, not reduce it. So, Mr. Mayor, in ending, I would say that the Lib Dems challenge the Mayor of London to look again at ULEZ, improve public transport, expand the bus network, and be tougher on developers like Pocket Living.
Thank you. Okay, Councillor Boy, you're next.
Yeah, so I'm seconding the motion reserving my right to speak.
Okay, Councillor Mahfouz.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm not sure what I just heard, to be honest, but I could hardly believe my eyes when I saw the motion that made mention this evening of housing being tabled by the Tories. The self-proclaimed party of private ownership has sadly turned the property ladder into a game of property snakes and ladders. The party that gave us record levels of interest rates in the 1990s has, under this incompetent and inhumane ensemble, caused irreparable damage to the housing market nationwide, but particularly here in London. They've outdone themselves with interest rates that have already increased 50-fold. That's right, 50-fold since May 2020. What a record. And of course, it's set to increase even further. And that's creating a housing crisis, which is being exacerbated by their determination to treat the working poor with absolute disdain, with housing support costs capped at pre-pandemic levels, whilst rents are rising at alarming rates. In Greenford alone, rents have increased by a whopping 83% in the last few years. That cap on housing support costs means that we as a council are having to step in to the breach time and time again to support those hard-working families who simply cannot make ends meet. Last year alone, we subsidised that to the tune of around £10 million, and this pressure will only continue to grow as we try to stave off the increasing numbers of families being thrown out on the streets and turning to us for help. We've seen a 12% increase in the number of homelessness presentations in the last year. 2,000 families already waiting in temporary accommodation, with the pressure only increasing. A Tory housing crisis continues to tighten the squeeze on struggling families. And yet, Mr. Mayor, this Tory party has the audacity, the absolute audacity, to lay the blame at the foot of our London Mayor, Sadiq Khan, a mayor who has dedicated not one, not two, not three, but you'll be thankful, I'm going to say £4 billion on affordable homes for Londoners between 2021 and 2026. Whilst the Tories bleat on as if they care about housing, we are putting our best foot forward on making properties safe, expanding our landlord licensing scheme to tackle the 1/5 of private housing across the capital that doesn't meet the government's own decent home standard. And Sadiq is supporting that work whilst the government sits idly. Support that means that housing staff in the capital are properly trained to enforce against the rogue landlords, and that many landlords, Londoners, are forced to rent from, in continuing to lobby at every level to ensure that renters can feel safe in their own homes. Mr. Mayor, when it comes to housing, most people are not asking for much, just a safe and affordable place they can call home. Sadiq has done more than any other mayor in London's history to work towards that goal. And this council is showing that we are on their side by doing all that we can, all whilst this Tory government is doing its level best to take us backwards to a bygone era. Mr. Mayor, families across Ealing are crying out to have a Labour government, a Labour mayor working together with a Labour council to ensure that they have a government that is on their side in delivering safe and genuinely affordable homes. I oppose this motion.
Thank you. Councillor Johnson, you're next.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's interesting tonight. We had the ladies who talked about their families and coming to this country in the 50s and 60s. And we mustn't forget that many West Indian men and men from the Indian Commonwealth came to this country and worked on London Transport, because London Transport wouldn't have existed without all of those men and their efforts. So I think we should remember that tonight. I think it's quite ironic that Councillor Malcolm, who I usually think is reasonably sensible, talked about, oh, we need to improve public transport. But look what the government's done to the grants to TfL. It's been utterly shocking. TfL used to get quite a lot of money, millions, in fact, up to 7 million a year for running costs. The government passed a bill which became law in 2018, which stopped that money. So London Transport, TfL, became unique, and it's really dependent upon the fares and the monies it gets from the business rate, the top up, concessionary fares and so on. And that is so unusual because we're a really big city and we do need that subsidy. If you look across the world, TfL depends 70% on fares. New York, 40%, Paris, 27%. Now, that just shows you how we treat our capital city. We've got 9 million odd people. We have 2 million who come in and out. We have tourists. We have the economy. What's the government doing? I think it seems to me biased. I mean, to do that to such an important part of our economy, and they're actually going against their own ideas, this levelling up agenda. Other parts of the country are getting large amounts of money for local transport. Is London? No, it isn't. So they can't, much as I agree with you, Councillor Malcolm, we'd like to see electric buses, etc. They don't have the money to do that. It's absolutely shocking. And with that grant being cut, then we had the pandemic. And because TfL depends on fares, of course, we had low passenger numbers. People were at home and they've never really recovered. As we know, people work from home now. So TfL hasn't really had a chance. Oh, the government has come up with sticking plaster suggestions, but they're just no good. We really do need big increase and support for TfL. They've been treated absolutely shockingly. And I don't think that's going to happen until we have a change of government. So I think the Conservative Party really need to think about this. And I think the other side probably know they've got their heads down. They know that this is an embarrassment because we're a big capital city and we should be supporting London. because we do want to encourage tourism in the economy.
Thank you,
So I'm
Councillor.
sure they really believe that too. So, but they can't say that in public. I understand that.
Thank you,
But it's shocking.
Councillor.
And I couldn't help but laugh at what Councillor, I'll get it right, Corrigan said about the candidates. Even when Boris Johnson was one of the candidates, someone else, and one of the Tory candidates, and he was stealing underwear off clotheslines. So what is it about Tories and standing for America? So
Johnson,
but so therefore we want to do
Councillor Johnson, thank you.
and that's what we want to do. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor.
Right. We will end this item at 9:20. I've got 13 names on the list, so you know you're going to have to be brevity. So the next one is Councillor Manro.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I don't know how to follow that, but I try. Mr. Mayor, look, I must say I'm proud to play my part in the work that the council partners with the GLA on the delivery of genuinely affordable homes. Just last week, I was on site in Southall, where with the help of the GLA, we will see the delivery of over 500 homes, with all 94 of the homes in phase 1 of the scheme being genuinely affordable. Cooperation with the mayor is essential in delivering affordable homes. Not that the Tories have ever shown any real interest in delivering genuinely affordable housing for anyone in this country. Perhaps if Councillor Conti could put on some reading glasses, he would be able to find the data he's clearly yearning for on affordable home completions. Luckily for him, I've been able to dig them out from this 13-page report on affordable housing delivery. It's hardly like War and Peace to find the numbers that he's so desperate for. And how many affordable homes did the GLA help to deliver last financial year? I hear you ask. Nearly 14,000 affordable homes in 22-23 alone, with over 1,000 of these being in Ealing, thanks in no part to having over £50 million of grant funding secured from the GLA. And if the opposition wish to take issue with the only reliable indicator of future housing completion, then they can put their fingers in their ears while I praise the over 25,000 starts on site that the mayor enabled in 22-23. Members opposite wish to complain about the work that the Mayor of London has done during his time in office. But why didn't we have a look back at how the last Tory mayor spent his time in office? £50 million wasted, remember, on the Garden Bridge that was never built? Over 300 million on the Route Master buses that needed to be retrofitted after they roasted passengers. The London cable car, which saw £20 million of public money spent, and now with regular commuter numbers that struggle to make it out of single digits. The Tories claim to be the party of fiscal responsibility whilst having a track record of wasting millions of pounds of public money, taxpayers' money, London's money on vanity project after vanity project. That's why in London and in Ealing, Labour is delivering real outcomes for the people that need our help the most. Mr. Mayor, I'm proud to vote down this motion.
Thank you. Councillor Stafford, you're next.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. And when I refer to the mayor in my speech, it's not going to be about you, just to be clear. The Mayor of London really has to look after 3 areas: crime, transport, and housing. Those are the 3 big areas. And on any measure, he has failed on all 3. This mayor would rather promote himself via press releases and publicity rather than tackling crime. And we know this when we see that both the Metropolitan Police and the London Fire Brigade, which he is responsible for, under his responsibility, have developed a culture of misogyny, racism, bullying. And he should be absolutely ashamed that he has presided over this. It is a disgrace. And Londoners do not feel safer. Residents of this borough do not feel safer. When at the end of last year, you were 50% more likely to have your belongings stolen than you were the year before, 21% more likely to be robbed, 15% more likely to be a victim of knife crime than you were a year ago. These are deeply concerning and troubling problems. Likewise, for rape and other sexual offences, which have seen double-digit increases in the last year, 10% and 31%, since 2018. This is a real problem. And if you look at tonight's Evening Standard, the article there shows that on the tube, crime rates are 40% higher than they were in pre-COVID levels. Then on transport, Khan has essentially mismanaged TfL's finances and absolutely ruined our transport system in this country, despite the fact that the government has given him £5 billion of emergency funding and another 3.6 billion to save his capital projects for the end of the year. And of course, every single week now, we almost have a strike on the tube because the unions know that Khan will roll over every single time. He's seen as he's too weak to stand up for them. And I think it was Councillor Johnson mentioned the fact that we are reliant on fares. We are, but it would be great if we weren't allowing £130 million worth of revenue to be frittered away through fare dodging. The mayor should get that. That's essentially 1 in 25 people using Transport for London services are not paying. That is absolutely ridiculous, and the mayor needs to sort it out. And then, of course, we get to his great transport project, the ULEZ. He has not been honest about the expansion. It was a sham consultation, which people did not want, and it is simply a revenue raiser, which will do nothing to tackle pollution, and will, as my colleague, Councillor Conti said, hit the poorest in our borough the hardest. And finally, on the housing, Sadiq Khan has been given nearly £9 billion from government to build affordable homes, but is failing. Compared to the previous mayor, which I think someone mentioned, who was delivering nearly 12,000 genuinely affordable homes each year, this mayor is barely getting over 8,000. And in fact, not a single home of the 4 billion that was mentioned by Councillor Nafuz has been spent, and not a single house has been built. And what's this being done on, Mr. Mayor? Simply on raising council tax, 9.7% this year. It's almost a 60% increase in council tax under this mayoralty.
Okay. All right.
This mayor has failed, and I urge you to vote for this motion. Thank you.
Right. Okay. We're not going to get all speakers in, but so bear that in mind if colleagues want to curtail their amounts. So Councillor Mohammed next.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I want to focus on misinterpretation of Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan's record on rescuing the nightlife economy from the damage done by COVID. For nearly 2 years, London was struck silent. We were unable to go to the theatre or the movies. Restaurants sat empty or with many tables left unfilled. People were afraid to go out. Since then, Sadiq Khan has taken action to rebuild London's night economy. Sadiq's appointment of Night Czar has been very successful. London is pioneering world-leading nighttime policies that supports the capital life between 6 p.m. and 6 a.m. It was recently listed as the best city in the world for culture. The Night Czar has hosted over 45 online and in-person night surgeries and founded the Nighttime Boroughs Champions network, which has representatives from 30 boroughs. Last year, the Night Czar launched the Nighttime Enterprise Zone program. Bromley, Lambeth and Greenwich were each awarded £130,000 to develop a range of activities and programs to make their street more welcoming and inclusive for people after 6 p.m. I want to particularly focus on the work Sadiq Khan has done to create a safer London for women, so that we too can enjoy all that London has to offer at night. That we have opportunity to experience not London life without the fear of being harmed. This year, the Night Czar hosted the Women Night Safety Summit and announced the Co-op supermarkets as the latest signatory, taking the total to over 1,200. In June 2023, Amy Lamé will convene a national event, Safety Roundtable, with key stakeholders, which will enable them review current approaches and share best practice. I'm supporting nighttime businesses to keep staff and customers safe through training to help them identify and address issue of vulnerability. Sadiq Khan has taken this step further by investing 108,000 to help make venues and public spaces in London safer for women at night time. So far, over 1,000 venues and businesses are signed up to Women's Night Safety Charter. Mr. Mayor, Sadiq Khan puts people's health first. I therefore oppose this motion. Thank you.
Councillor. All right, Councillor Razi, you're next, and you have 3 minutes.
Yes, we're going to stick to it today. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Once again, I am very surprised but delighted that our Tory colleagues would willingly shine a light on all their spectacular failings. Failings for the good people of Ealing, as well as those throughout the UK. Some of these colleagues in front of me sit in the same meetings as me, and I think that they hear the same things that I hear, the same anguish that I hear in our partners who wish that we could afford to all keep safe. Yet, here we have these motions being tabled. So let's take a look at Boris Johnson's glowing achievements as Mayor of London. We were talking about front counters being closed, 63 closed under his watch. London has lost 47% of its officers since 2010, with the majority of the cuts happening under Johnson. By the end of Johnson's time in City Hall, there were only 600 more police officers than when he started in 2008. In 2013, the numbers hit a low of 30,500, which has been the lowest it's ever been. The knife crime and other violent crimes rates fluctuated under his watch, but if you look at the trend, consistently trajected upwards in his 2 terms as mayor. I seem to recall much emphasis on an estuary airport, on garden bridges, on clowning around on zip wires, more than the pressing issues that all Londoners really wanted to hear about. So let's contrast that with Sadiq Khan's progress as Mayor of London. So over the last 6 years, Sadiq has managed the Met through devastating impacts of Tory austerity, which saw officer numbers plummeting and also saw £1 billion taken out of his budget. I'm sorry, we've had a faff. Sadiq has also invested record amounts from City Hall on policing. He's put in an extra 1,300 police officers on the capital streets and invested 70 million in activities for young Londoners to set up England's very first violence reduction unit. There's still a long way to go, but Sadiq is bucking the national trend in London by reducing violent crime. Sadiq has also led the police reform to help drive out the appalling racism, sexism, misogyny and homophobia that we've seen within the Met Police. And he will not be satisfied until Londoners have a police service that they deserve and one that is representative, trusted and fit for purpose. A series of appalling scandals have not only exposed deep cultural problems in the Met, but have contributed to the acute crisis of confidence in London's police. So, as I've only got 10 seconds, I'm going to wrap up and not talk about a couple of other things that I needed to touch on. Sadiq Khan's record as mayor.
Councillor Raza, I think I need to end it because we need to get more people in, sorry. Councillor Ball, you're next.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Sadiq Khan has been a deep disappointment as Mayor of London. The centrepiece of his last election campaign was housing delivery, but he has failed to meet his own targets for home completions. Mr. Khan's 2016 pledge to prevent Londoners from being, quote, priced out of our city rings ever more hollow as rents in Ealing go through the roof. Khan wastes money in City Hall while failing to tackle Londoners' problems. As Lib Dems, we diverge from the Conservatives' criticism in a couple of key ways. We believe that London's air quality is a serious issue and that extending ULEZ is the right policy, but implemented in the wrong way and at the wrong time. Pushing lower income Londoners with older cars and vans to change their vehicles is not something the Mayor can sensibly do in the middle of a cost of living crisis. The excellent budget amendment that Councillor Malcolm mentioned that was moved by Liberal Democrat Assembly member Caroline Pidgeon, which would have doubled the scrappage scheme and so reduced the impact for many Londoners, was initially carried nem-con by the London Assembly, but subsequently shamefully scrapped by Labour members. On policing, Mayor Khan has presided over a Metropolitan Police that has lost the trust of Londoners. But that is not purely due to the poor crime statistics the motion outlines, but more acutely because of the way that the Met has lost the trust of Black Londoners through continued victimisation ever since the Windrush days, to the disproportionate stop and search that continues to this day across London, including in our own borough. And it's also lost the trust of London's women through events culminating in the appalling murder of Sarah Everard by a serving police officer. The Casey review, which that triggered, lifted the rock of the Met and found it crawling with institutional problems of racism, misogyny and homophobia. Clearly, the problems in the Met are not new, but Khan had both an opportunity and a responsibility to address the culture of the Met, especially after the 2021 report that found the force institutionally corrupt, but he woefully failed to do so. So, Mr. Mayor, I commend our amendment to the Chamber. At next year's elections, Londoners need to elect a Lib Dem London Mayor who listens to London, not re-elect a complacent mayor who thinks he knows it all, but fails to deliver time after time.
Thank you, members. Right, I've got, I'm taking the next speaker's last one. They're going to move to summing up. So Councillor Wesson, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And before I begin my speech, I just wanted to take the opportunity to say a big thanks to you for hosting our first ever Pride reception. As an openly gay man, it meant so much to me, and I know it meant a huge amount to residents across the borough as well. It's frustrating that the opposition have used valuable council time for what is frankly a blatant attempt at electioneering. But as the motion speaks of wasting taxpayers' money, let's take a moment to reflect on some recent examples. Shall we talk about the almost £10 billion wasted by the Conservative government on overpriced, unsuitable and unusable personal protective equipment? The 29 billion spent on a test and trace system that never properly worked. The 2 billion lost to fraudulent furlough claims that this government has no intention to attempt to reclaim, or perhaps the other billions lost in fraudulent contracts for the Tories' dodgy mates. And let's remember that was all on Rishi Sunak's watch as Chancellor. And of course, the wider economic legacy of these last 13 years is enough to be scandalous all by itself. Mortgage rates up, inflation up, and interest rates up too. To quote one of the architects of the situation we find ourselves in, that is a disgrace. Now, Councillor Stafford attempted to lecture us on budget management this evening. It's farcical. That any member of the Conservative Party has the gall to criticise another party's management of public money, especially after Kwasi and Truss literally trashed the economy with their A-level style experiment. To address the points on spending on communications mentioned in the motion, London is a huge metropolitan city. Our mayor, Sadiq Khan, has a duty to communicate with every part of it. Of course, that costs money. Whether it was pandemic-based information or in other emergency situations, this communication is vital to making sure that our residents are safe and informed. The next time I speak in this chamber, I hope it will be to discuss material improvements to our borough, not to debate a motion desperately trying to keep their dwindling campaign in Uxbridge alive. Mr. Mayor, to quote our Shadow Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, it's time people sent the Tories a message. They're out of ideas, they're out of touch, and they're out of time.
Thank you, Councillor Weston. Right, Councillor Malcolm, are you ready to sum up your amendment?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. A number of subjects were talked about there, mainly about crime and the scrappage. The mayor's scrappage scheme clearly does not work and it needs to extend. His own report even told him that. And so therefore he should listen to his own reports and implement what Caroline Pidgeon and the Liberal Democrats suggested and got through the London Assembly. On the issue of crime rates are increasing in many areas. There are many police stations that are cut. The Met has lost the the credibility amongst people around the whole of London. People feel more fearful at night now than they did before because they can't trust those officers that they used to trust 5 or 10 years ago. And I think the mayor, although he's not ultimately responsible for some of the activities of the police, he is ultimately responsible for a large section of their funding and what they do. And he acted too late, even if he's done the right thing more recently. So I would say you should vote for this amendment and send a message to the Mayor of London that he needs to really improve issues such as transport and issues such as reducing crime.
Thank you, Councillor Malcolm. Councillor Conti, do you want to sum up your motion, please?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just pick up on a couple of points. Councillor Costigan, we clearly do not want to see anyone lose their life because of poor air quality, but the ULEZ expansion is not the policy that's going to deliver that. The TfL's own impact assessment makes very clear it's going to make a negligible difference to air quality. So it is just purely a tax-raising exercise for the mayor. We spoke about that. You mentioned the £200 million that we mentioned in the motion. That is how much it's cost in TfL figures for the infrastructure for the ULEZ expansion to be put in place. That's where that £200 million, that could have been spent differently. It could have been spent increasing the scrappage scheme. It could have been spent on more cycle lanes or other policies in order to deliver better air quality in London. Councillor Mahfouz, you mentioned about the working poor, but this is a policy ULEZ expansion that is going to cost disproportionately the poorest people in this borough more. And so there is absolute, so it is in the gift of the mayor to stop this policy and to affect exactly those people that you're talking about. Councillor Raza, you mentioned bucking the national trend. The only thing when it comes to the police that the Mayor of London is bucking the national trend on is not delivering on his targets for recruitment. Yes. Every other police force in the country has delivered. They've exceeded that. It is only the Metropolitan Police who have not delivered that. That is what the Mayor is bucking the trend on. And Councillor Weston, you talked about the promotion budget to the GLA, the Mayor. The Mayor has just advertised a role for a communications officer to promote the ULEZ expansion, costing the taxpayer £75,000. I don't know what you think, but I think that's an absolute waste of money. And as Councillor Stafford highlighted, the precept has gone up over 9% this year. So the Mayor is failing to listen and failing to deliver, and it's costing us more.
Thank you, Councillor Conti. So that's it. Let's go to the votes. The first one is the amendment by the Lib Dems, Lib Democrat amendment. All those in favour of that amendment? Okay, all those against? Any abstentions? All right, that amendment falls. So the vote is on the substantive motion. All those in favour of the substantive motion? Okay, all those against? Any abstentions? Okay, that motion has fallen. Okay, item 11, we'll get through the rest very quickly. Motions not for debate. There aren't any motions not for debate. Item 12, changes to the Constitution. Can I call on Councillor Shaw to move the changes of the Constitution?
Thank you. I move the changes in the Constitution as detailed in the agenda.
Can we just have one meeting, please? Okay, are they seconded?
So seconded.
Right, are they agreed? Thank you. Okay, so you're voting against. Oh, it's okay, sorry. All those in favour? Okay. Okay, all those against? Any abstentions? All right, that's carried. Those changes are carried. Right, appointments to committees outside the body. There are no appointments to committees out of the bodies. Item 14, urgent key decisions empty from calling. There are no urgent key decisions exempted from calling since last meeting. A couple of things I forgot to mention. We have in the corner Kim Brown, who's the new HRA director. I forgot to announce her earlier. She's just arrived. She's gone in council. And you'll be pleased to hear in terms of after refreshments, some old favourites are back tonight. So that's it. The meeting's closed. Thank you very much for your patience.